Hello and welcome to the Bearded Tits podcast. I'm your host Jack Perks, and this week we're talking to Rick Minter of Big Cat Conversations. We're talking about big cats in Britain, something that fascinates me, and I'm sure you'll all be really interested to hear that. So there's no news this week, nothing happened in the world, absolutely nothing. One thing that we have now got is a Twitter account. I was thinking about doing lots of social media, and I thought let's just do Twitter and see how we go. So if you want to follow the podcast, it's at Tit Bearded. Yeah, that's right. At Tit Bearded. So if you want to follow us, that's where I'll be posting most of my stuff. I'll still post it on my normal social media channels, but I'm trying not to spam that too much with podcast stuff. So give that a follow. Anyway, here's the chat with Rick Minter. So Rick, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, and thank you for having me on.
No, well, thanks for agreeing. I've been really looking forward to this because it's one of those things that I think people forget in the UK about this. I was going to say urban legend, but obviously you're going to prove me wrong about it being an urban legend. But I think before we get into big cats in the UK, we should probably cover your background with big cats and what kind of makes you qualified to talk about them.
Yes, okay. Well, I've had a career really in nature conservation, editing and writing. I'm long-term editor of Ecos, a review of conservation, sort of grey literature journal magazine that's now online and now not as active as it was, but that was very much an independent voice on nature conservation, sometimes challenging orthodox views with serious practitioners. Then I've had a long career with the Countryside Commission, Countryside Agency, which is one of the predecessor bodies to what's now Natural England. And I was what you might call a policy wonk, somebody who analyses policy, devises policy, tweaks policy, and so all kinds of land use and nature conservation policies. When I started moving away from the Countryside Agency consultancy, I decided to research. I'd seen a big cat at work unofficially. Obviously, I wasn't there at a location to watch black leopards, but I thought I saw a black leopard. But, well, I'm sure I did see a black leopard. It was very clear for about 45 seconds in the days before mobile phone cameras were around. And I decided, because I was doing writing and editing with Ecos, I might have a stab at doing a book to give the subject some grounding and profile. And I felt it's got to be a measured, well-researched book. So I spent a bit of time doing it, came out in late 2011, and then that opened doors. And since then, a lot of my time has been spent in this parallel universe of being with people overseas and here who are good trackers, who are good zoo people on big cats, who are good zoologists, good mammal experts, good nature conservation experts with an interest. And I've had a sort of self-learning process for that time. So researching the book and then dabbling with the key people who have helped me develop my interests and approach and knowledge of the subject.
I think you've probably already answered this then, but I'm just about to say, are there big cats running wild in the UK? But if you say you've seen one, it's probably going to be a very short answer. But so, because many people potentially might be skeptical or don't know the facts about it. So, in your opinion, I mean, do you think there are big cats running in the wild now, or certainly have there been?
Yeah, I certainly feel, having done a book on the subject and being immersed in it and seeing some material that doesn't get out sometimes and being contacted by witnesses and landowners absolutely routinely, that there is a small population, and we'll come on to what the candidate cats are. And it's consistent. I think the sample size is also important. So you met me, Jack, at the Bushcraft show a few years ago.
I did.
Yeah, so I would take each day at the Bushcraft show when there was people from the Bushcraft community and the public coming in, I would take about 15 reports in a stall, in an information and education stall, and the education's both ways, as I was learning as well as helping other people think about the subject. And it was consistent. And if I do that kind of education information stall at other rural shows, so far anywhere I've gone to across Britain, I get the same. I'm busy all day. I have to say, some people walk past looking as if it's some crazy freak show on the side, but which I quite understand. But many other people walk in. Some are curious. Some are aggressively skeptical. Some are mildly, politely skeptical. Some are skeptical and want to help because they think it's intriguing. But the majority are in there. It's a biased sample, of course. The majority come in because some people think they've seen them. They think a member of their family's seen one. They think they've seen signs on their land. And these are people from all kinds of backgrounds. And a nice example would be, say, two gamekeepers coming in within the same 5 minutes and seeing a life-size model mountain lion, also called puma and cougar, which make up about a quarter of the sightings of the reports in terms of what you can see resembling from the characteristics people report. And they just were there swapping notes for half an hour about the different situation in which they encountered one on their separate bits of land that they are gamekeepers for. And that is really what that stall is all about. It's for those people to be able to come in and have a serious grown-up conversation about something which is a bit of a taboo subject, which isn't really got much profile and will probably remain sort of unofficial for a while. And people are very grateful, very thankful. But of course, I'm learning all the time. So through processes like that's the main process through which I would take reports, but also I give talks and I go to meetings, and I have incidentally briefed off the record two mainstream countryside organizations who employ a lot of staff. They wouldn't want it probably, well, it's not, yeah, it's off the record. So, but I have been asked to brief them, and they were long meetings with people asking questions and having a long talk about it. But if you look at all the times when I've done sort of outreach with the public or receive emails and phone calls as well, I've had over 1,300 reports in
Wow.
just over 10 years. So that's a big sample. What does that sample show? If I compare that sample with other credible people around the country who also take reports near me and beyond in different regions, different counties, and in Scotland, it is the same. We get the same three main cats reported in good detail by people who know nothing whatsoever about them. But they don't know the names of these cats unless they look them up on the internet. Many do now. But they report them very well and very faithfully, sometimes including the calls, the vocalizations. Not only is it the detail people go into, it is the character. They describe the characteristics very well. And sometimes things you think they wouldn't pick up on, things like it seemed higher at the hindquarters, higher at the back end, long back legs. Very consistent are the long, thick tails of the two main candidate cats. So the three cats are, the first one is a black panther, presumed to be the melanistic leopard, black leopard.
Right.
And in melanistic leopards, black leopards, two black parents will breed on black 100% as far as we know. The evidence from the Malay Peninsula, which is the main stronghold of black leopards in the world across the distribution of leopards, is that virtually all the leopards there are black, and the local people in the Malay Peninsula call them panthers, actually. So, and that is, of course, Bagheera from the Jungle Book. He's a leopard, but he's got that black pigment from the melanism, which would probably be very useful if you're lurking in the shadows, an ambush predator in the shadows of the jungle. You don't come out in the open that much, and you show up a bit when you do. The other location where you get a good proportion of black leopards is Java, the middle part of Indonesia. And they're two different subspecies. So if we have had by accident the release and escape of black leopards from Java in Britain, which might be from zoos, for example, and black leopards from the Malay Peninsula, perhaps brought over from colonial times, but certainly in collections, and they have actually interbred, if you like, two subspecies interbreeding, might well create a healthy individual in a perfect environment, an environment which is very moderate in temperature and very abundant in food supply for an ambush predator like that. So let's move on from black leopards to the second candidate, puma. Now, black leopards account for about 3/4 of the sightings. And the puma, the mountain lion, the cougar is very similar in size and behavior and characteristics to the black leopard. If you sprayed a mountain lion, a puma, black, it would count for a black leopard.
I wouldn't like that job.
And in fact, there's a side issue of whether you can actually get melanistic pumas, melanistic cougars, but that's another debate. And of course, we have I would say we have an isolated population. So the genes in an isolated population of any sort of mammal can sometimes do strange things. So the puma, the mountain lion, cougar, same thing. The sandy brown one from the western states of America, basically, and all down through to South America, is the other one that is reported consistently. But always in the reports, you get about 5% lynx type cats,
Right.
ones which seem to be the Eurasian lynx. And of course, that's a very distinct cat, and it's very interesting that that's coincidental with the live discussion about reintroducing our former native lynx. We'll come on to that later.
Yes, yeah, we're gonna
Sure.
mention Lynx later, and I think it's interesting when you say you're at these events and you get this skepticism, because I think people sometimes lump in the Beast of Bodmin or whatever you want to call it, wherever it is, with like the Loch Ness monster and Bigfoot, but of course this is very tangible. It's not a mythical creature. These are real animals, and there's very strong or very tangible evidence that they were released. Or I think, I mean, I'm sure you'll tell me a little bit more about this, but a lot of it was releases in the 60s, wasn't it? Was it the Pet Act or something? Before then,
Dangerous Wild Animals Act. Yeah, I will come on to that. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say, sure, in relation to what you've just said, I think it's not like it's weird. It's not it's not a preposterous thing to say that there could be at any one time in Britain the odd few vagrant cats. They are mammals that have gone feral, that have got out of captivity.
Yeah.
I think what is the really intriguing issue, and where it would be nice to advance to a more scientific debate and discussion, is how come we have absolutely consistently in wide geographical areas across the country ongoing reports of these animals still, sometimes more than one, sometimes mother and cub. How come in a few decades they seem to have established a small, possibly viable population? That is the intriguing, radical issue to discuss, I think. Now, I don't think even the hardened skeptics would say you could occasionally would deny that you could occasionally have a vagrant cat out there. It's whether they're breeding and whether they have adapted and whether they're naturalizing. But what I would say is, so we've got this very big ongoing sample. Of those, say, 1,300 people, and year on year this is the same, I always reckon that 80 to 90% of the reports are credible. Okay. Obviously, you filter them. People will only come to you, I think, also if they trust you and think you're the right kind of person to relay this to and discuss it to. And some people want moral support when they relay it to you. So very often I'll be round a farm kitchen table or a business table where there's a business that's got land and property, or a utilities porter cabin where there's activity going on, and the people managing that bit of utility land are saying, reporting this stuff and wanting a quiet word. And it's always with the conditions: please don't tell anyone else. We do not want this land blighted. We do not want trophy hunters. We do not want hassle. We do not want media invasion. So you're constantly keeping it quiet. But what I would come back in terms of the sample and the cats. Now, depending how you want to classify cats in the wild across the world, there are 40 or 39 cat species. So across our sample, we are only getting 3 absolutely consistently year on year. And people can report them extremely well. They report the signs as well. And also, I would say about 20% of the reports, it's a horse or a dog as well that are spooked and bugged and are reacting. So if the skeptic wants to say, oh, these are missightings, these people are seeing dogs, or these people are seeing feral cats at the wrong scale, which I think is the main reason for missightings, actually, sometimes. then horses and dogs are part of the people who are getting it, the creatures that are getting it wrong, the witnesses who are getting it wrong. I think horses and dogs are normally very good witnesses. They often, the reaction of the horse or the dog normally alerts the person in the first place, because they say, I've never seen my dog react like that. I've never seen it make that stop still and go to the ground, or worried, or cower behind me, or make that noise. Same with horses. Sometimes people are riding a horse and they say, it was quivering and shivering so much, I thought it was going to have a heart attack or something. And I looked up and there was a mountain lion 20 meters in the woodland edge, which I probably wouldn't have seen had the horse not reacted like it. So there's something going on. There are an abundant number of Facebook groups establishing all over the country. We do not have that. We haven't got people consistently reporting wolverines or hyenas or flamingos out in the wild, but
No.
this is ongoing, and maybe it deserves some scrutiny and investigation.
So as of 2020, are you still getting reports like now? Are you getting reports this year that people are seeing big
Yeah.
cats? You are?
Yeah,
Wow. Okay.
I'll be up at 4:30 a.m. tomorrow morning with my son with a thermal camera, following up a report from a lady last week who reported one in a prominent location on the Cotswold Edge in Gloucestershire, and it's only 20 minutes from me. And I'm not expecting, by the way, to achieve anything, but you've got to follow up. Really, if it's so close, you're neglecting your duty, and also it's good to for the witness to know that you are following up and doing something. She was a complete skeptic. She saw one. So yeah, the witness lady reported a black panther, and then in the same location reported a muntjac carcass, which from the photograph looked very credibly large carnivore impact. And shame she didn't retain the carcass, because it would have been nice to look at and possibly even swab for the saliva of the culprit. And obviously, when you find a carcass like that, you go through a checklist, and we can come on to that later when we talk about the types of evidence. But just as an example, yes, there are credible reports ongoing. And every year, if you look at the data, the reports increase from, say, November to February. And we think that's because the animals, well, it's easier to see animals in the landscape in the wintertime, isn't it, when the cover's down,
Yeah.
grass and leaves are down. But we think it may be actually due to the activity of the animals as well. It may be that they're more bolder to get their prey, and deer are more vulnerable. But there's some pattern there, certainly. We do get an increase in reports pretty regularly most years from November to February in the colder months. This year we didn't, for the first time for ages, and I think it was because of the relentless rainy months we had in the past year, in the past winter and autumn just gone.
I suppose as well, it's that in the winter they need more calories, maybe as well. They need more food to keep warm, so maybe they hunt
Yes.
more. I don't know. But I know that all the cats that you mentioned as well can survive in that sort of in a British climate, like they're from North America, or leopards. I think they're the most adaptable big cat in the world, and obviously European
Yes.
lynx. They survive in Europe, so our climate
Yeah.
is perfectly suitable for them, isn't it?
Yes. Yes. I think it's temperature regulation. You probably, I mean, a cat will rest for the majority of the day, but in a cold temperature, it's not so convenient to rest. And so, body temperature regulation, you want to be a bit more active. But certainly, leopards, pumas, and lynx are generalist cats. They do not have any special characteristics which would mean that they couldn't adapt well in Britain. They are really resourceful generalist cats. Say if the black cats here were black jaguars and not black leopards, then black jaguars are a bit more specialist. They're a bit more heavy duty. We would have witness reports of them swimming at water's edge and taking bigger prey. They would be able to, a big tom jaguar would be able to attack a horse sometimes. They would risk attacking a horse. They would risk attacking cattle sometimes, but that's very rare in Britain. We do get some horse attacks sometimes, and some that have been verified by vets as well. So I
Oh,
think it
right.
is pointing to those three cats as the candidates that are establishing themselves here, but I think in very low numbers.
And I mean, I mentioned briefly earlier about the whole them being ex pets from the 60s. Is that mainly where they came from then? Like where because that's where people are going to ask, like where have these big cats come from?
I think there's been a range of episodes that have led to them leaking out, basically. And I think it would have started perhaps in wartime. They are strict carnivores, they're obligate carnivores, they can only eat meat. And if you had a collection in wartime, you really would have struggled to feed them. And people, I gather, let dogs out in wartime. So I think the first releases perhaps happened wartime. I think we certainly had testimonies of releases in 1976 following the Dangerous Wild Animals Act, when you then had to have there was a licensing system for keeping dangerous wild animals as pets in houses and in domestic situations, and that was far more onerous then to keep those animals. And there were many wildlife parks and zoos got asked if they could take them in, and there are sort of testimonies of people releasing them. And another reason might be that they were used as guarding animals for scrap metal dealers. In particular, there's various
Is that right?
explanations of that. Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
so
Yeah, yeah, and
rather than a German Shepherd, someone's got a leopard cooped
yeah,
up in their scrapyard.
yeah. I think, and if you're, if you're in that kind of informal economy and
Yeah, 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 yeah.
you work in the grey area,
I don't doubt it. Yeah, it's just good, not something you'd
yeah,
expect. But I guess that would put you off nicking something, a bloody great big
yeah.
leopard.
And again, we know that people had them for guarding, and butchers as well have had them for guarding animals. So some of these sort of owners would have been pretty lawless anyway.
Okay.
Same thing happened in Australia. In Australia, some of the mines were guarded. If people had a mining claim, they had a guarding black leopard, so the black leopards and pumas are reported in Australia. Same kind of issues there, and military mascots as well. Again, Australia and Britain claims of released pumas. American air bases and things had a mountain lion brought across sort of cubs, mounted. They call kits actually for mountain lions, pumas, cougars. So a variety of possible reasons for releases. And I think since the Dangerous Wild Animals Act, there's also a Zoos Act in 1981, and that was clamping down on the sort of leaky, ramshackled wildlife parks of the time. And so I think there have been uh, and even times of recession. I think if you're keeping these animals and the money runs out, it's an expensive interest to have. And I think sometimes people have just decided, the cuddly kitten's grown up and it's become expensive. And if it's not too feisty and you think it's not too much of an issue, you might think about releasing them if you can't face having them put down, or you can't find somebody who's got the money to take them on. So all kinds of possibilities for different episodes of releasing them. And each time that, of course, would add to the gene pool, wouldn't it? So it's not like there was one small founder stock.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. I just assumed that it was one kind of mass release, but it's interesting that you say that it's almost every 20 or 30 years, someone's dumping a new load of big cats. So that's really interesting that there's different genes, as you say, coming in, which is going to help with inbreeding and whatnot. In terms of evidence, what is the main evidence? Because obviously we'll come on a little bit in a second about why it's hard to get really good photos of them, but it's not so much clear photographic evidence, but you mentioned carcasses and things like that. What kind of things are you finding that's leading you to think, oh, this is a big cat that's done this?
Well, let's go through the sort of spectrum of the types of evidence quickly, because at the top is the best primary evidence, things like a body or DNA or close-up video. And then you get to things like vet-verified carcasses, and then you get to things like tooth pit analysis, which we'll explain in a second. And then you get onto the secondary evidence, things like ongoing sightings and how credible the sightings are, but large sample size helps that's obviously much weaker evidence, but a large sample size really helps bolster that point. But also the field signs, the droppings, the footprints, the tree scratches. So let's now go back up that scale. So the field signs are the ones where you're not going to find them just by going out willy-nilly into the countryside, start tracking and hope to get somewhere. You really are dependent on a witness or an informant guiding you to their land or guiding you to the area where they've seen something, and then checking it and thinking, is this valid or not? And unfortunately, a lot of those kinds of field signs are ambiguous. You so often have to say, I'm not quite sure. And I tend to give people a sort of percentage ratio towards cat or against cat. But often people aren't satisfied with being not sure, so it is very frustrating. But I think once you've got somebody who wants to be an informant, it's nice to have them connected, because they might invite you back with something which is much better a year later or something. So it's all about being trusting and validating if you can. And if you just scoff at people, you're not going to get their interest and engagement, and they're not going to be able to help you out in future when it might be not a false alarm. I think amongst those field signs, some of the ones that I think where you can give a good checklist on is a deer kill, is a deer carcass. And they are very clinical for a cat. You can only really make a judgment, I think, on ones that are really fresh overnight sometimes. And sometimes the witness will phone you up and you'll get I will send you a photo, and you'll get a view really quite quickly as to whether it's worth going to the scene if you're close enough, or getting somebody else there. And so there's a checklist that you go through, but one of the key factors is that because they're obligate carnivores, they're strict meat eaters, they can't eat a wild ungulate stomach because it's full of grassy vegetation. And so they do actually separate the stomach as they're shearing through to the soft organs, to prioritize the soft organs to eat first. So if the stomach is neatly laid on the side, it's a really big tick in favor of big cat. The other thing you're looking for is dispatch marks, especially the one of the key dispatch mark signs is the canines clamped at the windpipe. And of course, a dog can do that. Some dogs can bring down deer and will kill them like that, just like a big cat will. But the dog wouldn't normally then shear into the carcass very neatly and efficiently and tidily and consume half or three quarters of it. The other dispatch mark sign is what we call a muzzle hold, where it's clamping over the mouth to suffocate there. Sometimes they do that on bigger prey, and sometimes you will see the muzzle round the snout really chomped away. And you think, hang on, yeah, that was a muzzle hold, and there's no clamp marks at the windpipe. So that's another dispatch sign. So you're looking for the dispatch sign at the scale of a big cat's one. I would say the canine impacts 4 or so centimeters apart, and then though that consumption pattern and the stomach out as well. Sometimes the ribs absolutely sheared through. Foxes will tend to chew the rib end. So, and you're trying to distinguish felid impacts from canid impacts all the time, of course. The other type of, moving up to the primary evidence. Now, a low-grade type of primary evidence is what's called tooth pit analysis. That's being led, some work on that is being led by the Royal Agricultural University, has been now for several years, and there are students now there, several years worth of students in past years have done work in the lab and done backup other work on big cat evidence. And so there are students leaving Royal Agricultural University with degrees where their main key dissertation has been big cat evidence, especially tooth pit analysis. Now, a tooth pit sign on a bone, on the skeletal remains, is there can be several types, but you can get a shearing on the bone, you can get a canine hole, or you could get pits from the cusps, the sharp cusps of the back carnassial teeth. If you get a triangle pattern, if you get all three from one of the back carnassials, you can actually gauge forensically the pattern and match it to a cat the scale of a leopard or a puma, and that's what you're after. And that will be different from a wolf or a large dog carnassial in the same set, in the same system, in the dentition of a canid. So felid and canid dentition has evolved a little bit differently, and so it's a way of checking marks on the bones which might be there in older skeletons and skeletal remains that are there. And but we have now people looking for those, and we have some sheep farmers occasionally who get sheep impacts, and we had one this year in Scotland. They'd listened to the podcast, they'd heard about the podcast I do on big cats, and they'd heard about tooth pit analysis, and they'd thought that they had a big cat predator on their land occasionally taking the sheep, and said, we've got some marks on the bones just like you were talking about. Sent them to the lab, and it's been verified as one of the 16 samples now that's been verified in that process in the lab in the last 5 years, with different samples from deer mainly, sheep, wild boar in the Forest of Dean, and now Scotland. and some have just come through from Cumbria recently. So there's a nice geographical spread and there's a good number. And we've always said that, because I helped that study at the Royal Agricultural University, that an academic paper would be published. And of course, the bigger the sample is on something like that, and the wider geographical spread the samples are from, the sort of more robust the case is. So that's a nice bit of work on the in the sort of low grade primary evidence. Now, in terms of bodies, if we go right to the top of the scale, somebody recently had heard my podcast and emailed me and said, I've got a shot one, a stuffed shot one. I never told anybody, but here's a photo of it. And the way it's now, I will show that at my talks and people, in the pub on my laptop and that sort of thing. I'll show the photo, and I've been invited to go and see that stuffed one. And it's a 3.5 foot long melanistic leopard, a female one with a sort of, you'll see the sheen on the sort of grey sheen to the black fur. And the way it's been mounted by the taxidermist does suggest it's British, because I won't go into detail for the sake of the provider of that information, but there's a key sign that it is a British cat in the way it's being mounted and presented. So there, I can't sort of absolutely verify that as one that's a body shot in Britain that's presented as hard evidence, but that has been shown to be. The photos are very credible. I've been invited to see it, and the story behind it is very interesting. So there's a body. There would be other bodies that have been shot, and I have had several claims. They may not all be true, but I don't think, maybe perhaps they're all not fabricated, perhaps as well. And of course, if people shot one as a gamekeeper or as a farmer, whatever, they would probably shut up and bury it, and that's what that seems to have happened.
They're not going to shout about it, are they?
No, I think I think they worry about comeback and that sort of thing. But I have also had a good many deer stalkers and game sector people tell me that they've seen them in their scopes very clearly, but felt some of them didn't want to shoot them because emotionally they thought it was a fantastic animal, very interesting animal, and didn't think it was their place to shoot it. Other people said, I was worried about the comeback, and other people said wasn't sure. Some other guys have said, when I was younger, I probably have shot it, but I just enjoyed watching it. And those are all types: the puma, the lynx, and the black leopard. In terms of bodies on the road, I think the most, it's not like you're going to easily find a dead one that's sort of just petered out in life, because cats tend to die under cover. There aren't going to be many bodies because these are long-lived animals, 12 to 15 years. There aren't many of them, and they die under cover anyway. So bodies are going to be difficult to locate and find. But occasionally, I think the police do get asked to recover one. And we had in Gloucestershire, a fair few years back, one where there was a witness report of an incident outside a house on the edges of Gloucester, and one was allegedly hit and killed, and police phoned, and the road was shut off for 3 hours, and it was recovered. A white van turned up and whatever, and that was from a witness. Now, a couple of years later, when a police officer who might have known something about that had an informal chat with one of my best sort of contacts on the subject here in Gloucestershire, he completely verified the story. And he clarified. He went on to clarify some of the points. I won't go into the full detail, but you're not going to get the police to issue a press release about that. I don't blame the police for doing that sort of thing. It is very difficult. What do you do? What do you say? And we just found out about it informally, but there was complete corroboration. What I will say is that the witness, the damage on the car, the police fixed because they realised he wouldn't be able to make an insurance claim. But so other ways that people keep under the radar about this, I have twice been with vets when they verified carcasses, sheep carcasses, but again, vets do not want to go on the record about this. On the podcast I do, we've just had a lady who had a horse attack, and the impacts on the horse are very credible and really do seem to match the sort of raking you'd get down the flanks of a horse if something like a leopard or a puma jumped onto the back of a horse. And the vet verified that and said, yeah, absolutely nothing else could have done this. And the horse was very, very freaked out and spooked for another couple of weeks. It took a while to get over that. So, but you're not going to get these people to go on the record about that sort of thing. They see it as potentially impacting on their reputation, but
Yeah.
occasionally people are exposed to that. So it's very much this sort of undercover, unofficial world that you get drawn into. And I'm constantly looking at the bigger picture, but everybody else that I'm in touch with, of course, is just seeing this one-off case that's affected their locality.
Yeah, well, of course, the other thing is that when you take certainly leopards all across the world, and there's leopards in Mumbai and quite densely populated areas, and yet people very rarely see them, even where leopards are relatively common because they're so secretive and elusive. So when people say, "Well, why don't more people see these big cats if they are present in the UK?" That they're going to stay out of the way. They're not going to be out in the open, are they?
Yes, in their native countries, people rarely see them. I go to Western states of America more in relation to puma, mountain lion, cougars, more than I go to places that have leopards. And when I'm with the practitioners, the rangers and researchers and wildlife biologists who deal with mountain lions, they see them all the time because they're following radio collared ones. But if you speak to somebody in the hotels and restaurants and a normal citizen in Colorado or Utah or whatever, they've never seen one, or if a member of their family or somebody they know has done, it was a big event. They don't. It's not really a high-profile animal in the Western states, even though there are sort of 30 to 40,000 of them. But you wouldn't expect to see one. I liken it a bit to otters here. I mean, you're a fisherman, I gather, and you're at the waterside environment a lot. So you obviously see otters, but the average British citizen would not expect to see an otter in their lifetime, really, or have a chance
No,
encounter.
no, they're very
And
elusive. I
there
mean,
are,
yeah, I've only seen them a handful of times, even when I'm looking for them. So yeah, the general public are very lucky to see something like that.
yeah, and I think these. As you say, Mumbai is the classic about leopards, but other parts of India, and they can, if one has a territory, both mountain lions and leopards, if they have territories in or close to urban areas or urban edge areas, again, they're often hardly ever seen. I mean, there's a classic case of a big tom mountain lion that has part of his territory around the hills that skirt around the Hollywood studios where the Hollywood sign is. And
There's a
yeah,
very famous picture by Steve Winter. I think it's Steve Winter's the photographer, and it's this
mm,
mountain lion with the Hollywood sign in the background. Is that the same cat or
yeah, that's it.
yeah?
Yeah, yes, there's only one there. P22, Puma 22 is his sort
Okay.
of is his code name, and they only know about him really because he's radio collared, and they know that he has a territory that is adjacent to 250,000 people. Yet he's hardly ever seen. He doesn't cause many issues or hardly any issues. Unfortunately, he is sort of landlocked by all the highways, and I was asking some people on mountain lions in America last time I was there, will he ever breed? And they said no, there are no females within his territory that he could get access to, and he'll probably die on the freeways, passing over the multi-lane highways in America to try and get to broaden his territory to encompass some females like he should be doing. But he's just landed up in that awkward situation. But he's, to all intents and purposes, an invisible big cat, an invisible puma, a large one, but not causing much bother. So they do skulk away. I think they're very shy and nervous of humans. We're bother and hassle to them. And if we're not stressing them, and if they're not stressed, and they've got plenty of food, they'll stick to what they know and not take risks.
I guess the big question is it's a two-layer question. Firstly, is there any idea of how many of these big cats there are? And I guess what people will be wondering is if there are these big cats present in Britain, are they a potential threat to people?
In terms of the numbers, it's very much. I mean, a lot of this is speculation. I do
Yes, yeah.
appreciate that, and we're always wanting more and better evidence. In terms of the numbers, how do I reckon? I've got a handle on the numbers. Well, what I would say in the big sample I have, and the ones that keep coming in now through local newspapers and Facebook sites, and not all of those are credible. I think it really does help to have the report directly to you and speak to the person themselves before you gauge how credible it is. But I would say the majority of these reports of the three cats, they are reporting cats which seem to be confident, healthy, fit, and wised up to living in Britain. They don't seem to be reporting very often, and a case like this will stand out, a bungling one that isn't melting away easily. Sometimes people will say it was so easy to see and it was so unsure of itself and so seemingly bewildered, it seemed to be a recent released one, a one
Yeah.
that seemed to be coming to terms. Now, 99% of the reports are ones there where they are arrogant, walking around as if they own the place, and seem to have been grown up here. They know what they're doing. They're fit, confident, healthy cats. So to have that amongst the population of cats here, from what I've read and what the feedback I get from people who know about the genetics, and certainly if the population numbers, if you're establishing something like Lynx, you'd want to get to 200 plus. If you get under 200 plus, you worry about 200. You worry about the sort of viability. So I have to think that because we're not seeing hardly ever a reported cat with signs of inbreeding, that we've overcome that sort of genetic bottleneck, that inbreeding issue. So have we got 250 each of the black leopards, the American mountain lion type, and the lynx type? Not so sure about the lynx because the sample size isn't so big. The numbers, the proportions aren't so
No.
big. But in terms of breeding itself, people report females on heat. The puma on heat, the female puma on heat, is a very distinct sign and a call, and people report them without knowing what it is, but they do report them. And sometimes people report mother and cubs, and it's very emotional. People are very reticent to report usually anyway, and even more so if it's a mother and a cub scene. Sometimes people see two adults together, and the emotional impact when you're dealing with a witness like that is much more profound than the emotional impact of other reports. So I think there's whether the breeding and the population will be viable in decades to come is another matter. But certainly, I think now that there seems to be, I would say, they are slowly naturalizing, and also I would say 250-ish of each of these types of cats across the whole of Britain is actually not many. You wouldn't expect to see them very often, and there may be more, maybe a few less. But I think that's my sort of stab at the numbers. Now, in terms of impacts on people, well, it's funny. I think because we think, oh, they're a large carnivore, we think of them as a snarly beast. But of course, they're not snarly beasts. They're shy and wary of us. And most of the witnesses report their natural behavior, which is to arrogantly see a human and maybe their dog and think, that's trouble. I'm just going to slowly waft away. And they just drift away and melt away. They don't sort of charge off like a fox does.
No.
They sort of assess and again, it's another reason why a lot of these witness reports are so credible. They are really reporting how the animal behaves in the wild very well. Once every year and a half, you'll get a report where somebody has had a bit of a scary encounter. It's been really close. The cat's been really close to them, or the cat has seemingly been eyeing up their dog.
Yeah.
And obviously that does freak people out. So, but even most of those people who have been scared or feel that they were stalked a bit, perhaps, they have normally been protective of the cats. A lot of people admire these animals. They're very charismatic, very beguiling, but they also feel they almost feel sorry for them and protective of them. Not always, but I would say the majority of people are tolerant, if not positive, about them. And we can come on to their impacts on the ecosystem if you like. But a lot of people actually think it through and think, well, hang on, if they're culling deer, if they're keeping the foxes down, if they're stacking on bunnies all the time, and they're hardly ever going for our pets and hardly ever going for sheep, then maybe they're an asset in the ecosystem and the benefits outweigh the problems. So people do think it through very responsibly in the main, I find.
Yeah, no, I mean, we haven't had, top level carnivores in Britain for hundreds and hundreds of years. So the ecological benefits of that are obviously quite beneficial, as you mentioned, deer numbers and things like that. Is there a hotspot in I mean, I know you might be reluctant to give away exact locations, but is there an area of the UK where you would say there are more sightings than others? I know you mentioned you're based in Gloucester and you get reports there locally.
Yeah, that's a difficult one because I think, like a lot of issues in field biology and zoology, and probably lots of other recording factors. Whatever the factor is that you're taking records of and taking data about, I think it's prone to what is called the recorder effect. So you get a higher incidence of reports where you've got trusted people who are on the case and known and have a Facebook site or have a presence in the locality and are trusted through the grapevine. So we get a fair amount of ongoing reports in Gloucestershire, but then there's me and a buddy and our network of people who are on the case and known about largely. So it's a very difficult one, but certainly let's take Gloucestershire as an example. Now, I would say we have the Forest of Dean, which is yielding ongoing reports. We have the Stroud Valleys and the Cotswold Edges down that way, which is some of those are very wild and deep and wooded and stuffed with deer. So there's that area. There's the Cotswold Water Park, the old sort of worked out sand and gravel pits area with lots of water birds and lots of easy pickings for a cat and a canal routeway as well. And we have parts of the Cotswolds themselves, all of which yield reports year on year on year. But we have other parts of Gloucestershire, particularly where I live, where you hardly ever get reports. In their native countries, their territories tend to be in patches. You get a sort of a splodge of territories, and then you get nothing. And you might get a young male dispersing from one of those clusters of territories to another. And of course, that helps overcome the inbreeding issue. So I would say that I think I would know in the sort of 5 miles in all directions from me if there were big cat reports, and we hardly ever get them. And if we do get them, it's sort of you get 2 or 3 in a month, and you think, hang on, this is interesting. We've suddenly got a little episode kicking off here. Maybe there's one passing through because they're credible, and these people don't know each other. I would say we've on, the Forest of Dean, Stroud Valleys, Cotswold Water Park, parts of the Cotswolds are ongoing, hotspots in Gloucestershire, and there would be the same elsewhere. But let's say Lincolnshire, a flat, fairly bland in terms of landscape features and cover for a cat. Lincolnshire does yield reports. Now, the reports that we're getting from Lincolnshire, it seems to be that they use the field edges and the crops. In India, leopards like sugarcane, and they'll have small territories when they're in the sugarcane. Of course, plenty of rodents and small mammal prey in sugarcane landscapes. So again, it's back to what you said, Jack. They're very adaptable, very resourceful animals. So their territories might vary depending on the terrain and the landscape. We tend to think they would like woodland and the woodland edge where the deer are, and I think that's certainly the case in Gloucestershire and the sort of steeply incised valleys where there aren't many people and the deer can be targeted. But if we're getting credible reports in Lincolnshire in cropland, it does rather prove they can pretty much live anywhere.
I can't remember if I mentioned to you actually, but my mum and my grandma claimed that they saw a big cat in Devon, and this was about 15 years ago now. So they were driving home from. We were staying in North Devon at fishing lakes actually, and they were coming home at night, and they claimed this big black cat, came out, stood in the middle of the road, stared at them, and then skulked off into the bushes. And it's one of those. I know my mum's she's not particularly into wildlife, but she knows what a domestic moggy is and what a big cat is, and she's always maintained that that she saw the beast of Bodmin, or it was a bit further away from Bodmin, but you get my meaning.
Yeah.
So
yes,
that was
sure.
kind of her story from it. They turning up. I'm going to end on one last question for you, Rick, and that is your thoughts on bringing Lynx back, because of course I can't remember if it's hundreds. I think it's only hundreds of years ago since they were in the UK, but they were a native
1500.
species. 1500.
Yeah.
Okay,
1500 years ago-ish. Yeah.
So in the grand scheme of history, that's not that long. Certainly ecologically, it's not. So we would have had these predators. Do you think that there is a room for lynx to be back in the UK? I mean, certainly people always talk about bears and wolves, and whereas I'm all for reintroduction and I love rewilding, I'm not sure if bears and wolves are the way to go just because of the practicalities. But lynx make a lot of sense to me, and I'd love to see lynx back. But I'm interested to hear your thoughts on bringing them back.
if I put my sort of hat on as I was in a previous sort of life as a sort of policy advisor and devising policies and bringing all the sort of additional support measures you would need if a new policy came out, then I would be thinking, well, if we're going to do this, we need everybody on board. So we need lots of participation of all the communities and all the kinds of professional organizations and groups, the professional groups that are going to be affected and influenced. So we want them to understand why this is being considered and how they be affected, how they hopefully might benefit from it, and how they could be assured that any troubleshooting and tweaking of the approach was going to happen and going to be done. So I have had farmers and game sector people walk into my big cat information tent sometimes for the past few years, sort of being okay about the big cats that they see, but ironically, really not so keen on reintroduced lynx. And so, but if I say to them, well, what about if you influence the whole process and your professional bodies that you're members of, that you respect, were in on the inside of the whole system? So if they weren't happy with what was going, they could help tweak it or stop the pilot a project approach, or if there was one problem individual, and don't forget they will be radio collared, so if there's a problem individual, you can hopefully intercept it and bring it out of the project, and that does calm them down quite a lot. So I do think it's the way. I know this sounds terribly diplomatic and terribly sort of wishy-washy, but I think it's right. Everybody's got to be on board. I really don't feel it should be forced on people. You've got to do all that preparatory work, and I would put the people who you think might be most against it, I put them on the inner circle of making it, charged with the responsibility of doing it. If they are content that all the boxes are ticked about how to go about it and any troubleshooting. So that, in terms of procedurally, that's what I would do. But in terms of conceptually, yes, I don't think it's an issue. You'd hardly see them. People would probably get frustrated that they.
I went to a talk on Lynx reintroduction in Scotland last year, and I can't remember the name. Scotland, the Big Picture. I don't know if you've come across them.
David Hetherington, probably.
That's
David
it. Yes,
Hetherington,
yes, that's right. He did the talk, and he was saying there's a national park somewhere. I can't remember whereabouts in Europe, but they've got like the lynx as their logo. But the ironic thing is, no one sees that. There's a relatively healthy population, but very few people.
It's the Harz Mountains. Is this the Harz Mountains in
quite
Germany?
possibly,
Yeah.
quite possibly. So you know more. Well, I would expect you to know more than me, Rick. But they push lynx as a tourism device. People are like, come and see the lynx. But the reality is, you're incredibly unlikely to see a lynx. And I think, like you say, if they were reintroduced to the UK, you'd be so lucky to see them. I guess it's like Scottish wildcats. I know their population is very low, but how often do people ever see Scottish wildcats? Incredibly rarely. And I think the same case would be with lynx.
Yeah, I mean, lots of mammals are elusive, aren't they? Pine martens would be difficult to see, for example. Yeah. But I think the cats are super elusive as an ambush predator. These ones are, they're not like cheetahs. Cheetahs run their prey down on open ground, so you might see a cheetah, but you'll be terribly lucky to see an ambush predator like a puma or black leopard or a lynx. So I was on a field trip on lynx a few years ago, and the guy who was radio collaring them in this location in Bavaria, where they've been brought back, I said to him, how often do you see one in the wild that you're not intercepting, that you haven't sort of had to go and intercept? And he said, I've been doing this for 7 years. I'm in the heart of several of their territories, and I've only had 3 glimpses in 7 years. And so that shows you, and he's looking for them. So
yeah.
Ecologically, and in terms of in the ecosystem, no problem. The ecosystem could take them and would benefit from them, and I think most people see that. It's can you get everybody on board satisfactorily? I do think that's really got to be done, and I think the benefit of them over the ones that are the wild ones we have that I would claim are naturalizing already is that these would be radio collared and we'd know where they were going, which would be lovely, because we rack our brains thinking where are these black leopards going and how big are their territories? Perhaps anything from 5 square miles to 50 square miles, and a lynx would probably have around 10 square miles if in perfect conditions with a good range of prey and everything. So it would be fascinating to be able to see the telemetry data of a radio collared larger cat in Britain. So I think the other issue is how would they get on with the cats that are here already, the ones that I am proposing are here and naturalizing. And I think with the other lynx, it would just be they would interact and breed with them, and so that would widen the gene pool anyway.
Yeah.
And they would have to learn to work around the bigger cats that they might find troublesome, that would be stealing their prey sometimes, or even dispatching one if it was a problem. But they tend to, I think they're pretty savvy, and they tend to sort of work around each other. And I don't think there's ever really going to be that bigger number of the naturalizing pumas and the naturalizing black leopards to be that much of an issue for a reintroduction program of lynx.
No, well, I can't remember the exact number, but when I went to that talk with David, it wasn't like huge numbers of lynx that because being a top predator, you're not going to introduce loads and loads of them. I mean, it was. I'm trying to rack my brain now. It was something like he proposed 10 or maybe it was a little bit more than that, but it wasn't
Yeah,
loads of them. It was like just a few, and then I guess you see
yeah,
how
you
they
do
get
them
on.
in batches.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. You do them in batches of, I think some people have said 6, other people have said
Okay.
10 or
Yeah.
20. And
Okay.
obviously more females, lesser males and more females, because a male encompasses 3 or 4 females territories. But you've got to have enough of each. The proportional balance has got to be right. Because if your males all get run over or get away from the females, you're not going to have breeding. But over time, if it's successful, you're going to do more batches of 10 or 15 or whatever, and build it up if that needs to, and then
Yeah.
see how the breeding goes. So
Yeah.
yeah, well, we'll see, but I just think it's got to be done in a very considered way with everybody on board.
Yeah, no, I agree. You can't just go releasing something without consulting everyone who it's going to
Mm.
potentially affect. Well, look, it's
Yeah.
been absolutely fascinating talking to you, Rick. I think before we go, if someone has got a big cat sighting they'd like to submit to you, what's the best way to get that over to you?
Yeah, well, they can just look me up on my podcast website, bigcatconversations.com. I do a fortnightly podcast with witness reports of big cats, and sometimes they're recent ones, sometimes they're past ones, which because they're raising an interesting generic point on the subject. So you can email me through that website. It's rick@bigcatconversations.com. I'm very happy to hear with any queries or issues or questions people have on the subject, even if it's not a witness report. But thank you, Jack. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
No, it's been really interesting. I mean, it's not. I mean, I know about the whole big cats being in the UK, but I didn't know as much. So you've opened my eyes to it all, and I'm going to be. I was going to say be looking over my shoulder when I'm out now, but I won't be because I know it's nothing that I should really be worrying about. But look, it's been an absolute pleasure, and take care, Rick.
Thank you very much indeed.
That was Rick Minter of Big Cat Conversations, and I think it's fantastic that there is still some mystery in the UK. It's not all been discovered, and there are things still out there potentially. So that was great. Hopefully you've enjoyed today's podcast. This has been the Bearded Tits podcast. I've been your host, Jack Perks, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.